Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. On behalf of Virtual University, I welcome you once again to the second lecture of the Data Communication course in this sixth semester. I hope you have enjoyed the first lecture and you understood almost everything that we talked about in the first lecture. मुझे ये भी उम्मीद है कि आपने suggested reading या जो task मैंने आपको last lecture में दिया था, आपने वो भी complete किया होगा. Dear students, I hope कि last lecture में जो कुछ starting facts या initial information मैंने आपको दी थी, आप लोगों को वो समझ आ गई होगी. उसी information को base बनाकर we will try to go through today's lecture. अगर you have any problems about the previous lecture or in the material that you have actually gone through in the suggested reading that I mentioned in the last of the previous lecture, feel free to contact me via email that has been provided to you. Before we actually start off with today's lecture, थोड़ा सा टाइम स्पेंड करते हैं. पिछले लेक्चर में हमने ये देखते हैं कि हम लोगों ने क्या कौन से टॉपिक्स जो हैं वो स्टडी किए थे, कौन सी चीज़ें ऐसी थी कि जो हमने स्टडी की थी. एक छोटा सा रीकैप करते हैं इससे पहले कि हम आज का लेक्चर शुरू करें. लास्ट वीक वी एक्चुअली स्टार्टेड ऑफ विद द डेफिनेशन ऑफ डेटा कम्युनिकेशन सिस्टम. हमने देखा कि डेटा कम्युनिकेशन की डेफिनेशन टेलीकम्युनिकेशन से थोड़ी सी डिफरेंट है. डेटा कम्युनिकेशन इज अ सबसेट ऑफ टेलीकम्युनिकेशन एंड इज डिफाइंड टू बी द transfer of information or the exchange of information in the form of zeros and ones between two computers using a transmission medium. फिर हमने इस definition के थोड़े से जो points या aspects जो कि which actually needed the clarification उसको clarify किया. उसके बाद हम लोग थोड़ा सा time हमने spend किया on a brief history of communication. We started all the way from 1837, tried to move all the way up till today. डेटा कम्युनिकेशन सिस्टम्स कब से शुरू हुए, क्या उनका रोल रहा और आजकल उनका क्या रोल है. देन वी एक्चुअली वेंट ऑन टू द डेटा कम्युनिकेशन सिस्टम. कौन से कंपोनेंट्स, कौन से प्रोसेसेस, कौन से ऐसे कॉन्स्टिट्यूएंट एलिमेंट्स हैं जो कि मिलकर एक डेटा कम्युनिकेशन सिस्टम बनाते हैं. ड्यूरिंग द कोर्स ऑफ दिस स्टडी वी वेंट थ्रू क्वाइट अ नंबर ऑफ कंपोनेंट्स. हम लोगों ने 5 बेसिक कंपोनेंट स्टडी किए जो कि मिल के एक डेटा कम्युनिकेशन सिस्टम कॉन्स्टिट्यूट करते हैं. उन 5 कंपोनेंट्स की क्लैरिफिकेशन की, एलैबोरेशन की, वी एक्सप्लेन्ड एंड वी ट्राई टू एनकम्पास एंड अंडरस्टैंड ऑल दोस 5 कंपोनेंट्स एंड देयर रोल इन द कम्युनिकेशन सिस्टम. फिर हमने कुछ कम्युनिकेशन सिस्टम के मॉडल्स देखे. ऑल्दो दे वर डिफिकल्ट टू अंडरस्टैंड फॉर यू, आई टोटली अंडरस्टैंड कि इस स्टेज पर वो थोड़ा सा मुश्किल होंगे. स्पेशली द कॉम्प्लेक्स फॉर्म ऑफ दोज मॉडल्स विल बी अ लिटिल डिफिकल्ट फॉर यू गाइस टू अंडरस्टैंड. बट हमने कुछ मॉडल्स देखे. द फर्स्ट वन वाज अ रिलेटिवली सिंप्लीफाइड मॉडल जो कि मुझे उम्मीद है कि आपको समझ आ गया होगा. एंड दैट्स व्हाट माय एम वाज. आई वांटेड टू अचीव इन द लास्ट लेक्चर टू मेक यू अंडरस्टैंड एट लीस्ट द फर्स्ट वन ऑफ द सिंपल मॉडल्स कंसिस्टिंग ऑफ just the 5 components: a sender, receiver, message, the transmission medium and the protocol. उसके बाद before we actually left in the last lecture हमने एक complicated सा digital data communication system study किया था. This was not actually the data communication system that I wanted you to understand in the first lecture. That was a part of the big approach that I talked about in the very beginning. ये उसी अप्रोच का हिस्सा है जो मैंने आपको बहुत पहले बताई थी कि हम पहले 1-2 लेक्चर्स में एक बहुत बिग सिनेरियो और बिग पिक्चर, एक बड़ी सी तस्वीर अपने लिए क्रिएट करेंगे और फिर उस तस्वीर के डिफरेंट कंपोनेंट्स को पूरे लेक्चर में और थ्रू आउट दिस कोर्स लेके चलेंगे, हर कंपोनेंट को एक्सप्लेन करते हुए, हर कंपोनेंट को समझने की कोशिश करते हुए. आज का लेक्चर, द ओवरव्यू ऑफ टुडेज लेक्चर. What are we going to go through today? Basically, I'm going to start over with the key terminology. पिछले लेक्चर में मैंने बहुत सी बातें, बहुत सी टेक्निकल टर्मिनोलॉजी आपको बताई, लेकिन इन दैट एस्पेक्ट वो टर्मिनोलॉजी शायद बहुत से स्टूडेंट्स को वेल नोन नहीं थी. उस स्पेसिफिक टाइम पर उस टर्मिनोलॉजी को मैं एक्सप्लेन नहीं कर सका या मैंने समझते बूझते हुए एक्सप्लेन नहीं किया. तो आज मैं शुरू में आई विल टॉक अबाउट सम टेक्निकल और की डाटा कम्युनिकेशन टर्मिनोलॉजी, कौन से थोड़े से पॉइंट्स हैं जो कि हम थ्रू आउट द कोर्स यूज करेंगे एंड दैट आर सिंपल इनफ फॉर यू टू अंडरस्टैंड. उसके बाद वी विल एक्चुअली लुक इनटू द स्पेसिफिकेशंस ऑफ अ नेटवर्क. व्हाट इज द कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ अ नेटवर्क. हम लोगों ने एक डाटा कम्युनिकेशन सिस्टम तो पढ़ा, अब हम डाटा कम्युनिकेशन सिस्टम्स की डिफरेंट डिवाइसेस को और इनफैक्ट डिफरेंट डाटा कम्युनिकेशन सिस्टम्स को किस तरह से मिलाकर एक नेटवर्क कॉन्स्टिट्यूट करते हैं. वी विल एक्चुअली लुक इनटू दैट. उसके बाद वी विल मूव टू अ लिटिल इंपॉर्टेंट एट्रीब्यूट ऑफ अ डाटा कम्युनिकेशन सिस्टम और इनफैक्ट नेटवर्क्स. हम लोग नेटवर्क्स की भी कुछ परफॉर्मेंस क्राइटेरिया और कुछ एस्पेक्ट्स देखेंगे, लेकिन एक स्पेसिफिक एस्पेक्ट जिसको हम थोड़ा सा टाइम एलोकेट करेंगे, थोड़ा सा टाइम लगा के पढ़ेंगे, दैट इज डिस्ट्रीब्यूटेड प्रोसेसिंग. We will come to know or we will try to explore what do we actually mean by distributed processing and why is such an important aspect of the networks in data communication system. Then we will try to find out the network criteria. What are the different factors that a network's performance actually depends upon? And last but not the least, we will try to cover some of the uses of networks in our डेली लाइफ. कौन कौन सी डिफरेंट फील्ड्स ऑफ लाइफ हैं कि जिनमें हम नेटवर्क्स को एम्प्लॉय कर सकते हैं, कौन सी ऐसी फील्ड्स हमारे आसपास हैं जो कि रोजमर्रा जिंदगी में हम नेटवर्क्स को लेकर अपने साथ चलते हैं. दे मेक आवर लाइफ ईजियर बट वी डोंट एक्चुअली रियलाइज दैट दीज आर नेटवर्क्स एंड डाटा कम्युनिकेशन सिस्टम्स दैट आर प्लेइंग ऑल दिस रोल अराउंड अस. सो टू स्टार्ट ऑफ विद, डियर स्टूडेंट्स, वी विल एक्चुअली स्टडी सम ऑफ द की डाटा कम्युनिकेशन टर्मिनोलॉजी. कुछ डेफिनेशंस, कुछ कॉन्सेप्ट्स जो कि मैं आपको देना चाहता हूं जो कि थ्रू आउट द कोर्स आपके काम आएंगे. लेट्स स्टार्ट ऑफ विद द फर्स्ट डेफिनेशन. द फर्स्ट डेफिनेशन इज अ सेशन. व्हाट डू वी मीन बाय अ सेशन? अ सेशन इज एक्चुअली अ कम्युनिकेशन डायलॉग दैट इज बिटवीन द नेटवर्क यूजर्स और एप्लीकेशंस. अब सेशन को आसान अल्फाज में एक एग्जाम्पल देकर समझते हैं. वी विल ट्राई टू एक्सप्लेन दिस कॉन्सेप्ट बाय यूजिंग द एग्जाम्पल ऑफ अ टेलीफोन सिस्टम. एक नॉर्मल टेलीफोन जो कि आप रोजमर्रा के इस्तेमाल में आपके घर में होगा. व्हेन यू एक्चुअली ट्राई टू पिक अप अ फोन एंड देन ट्राई टू डायल सम स्पेसिफिक नंबर, व्हाट यू आर डूइंग इज यू आर ट्राइंग टू क्रिएट अ कनेक्शन और यू आर ट्राइंग टू इनिशिएट अ सेशन आउट हियर. जब आपका रिसीवर वो फोन को पिक कर देता है तो दैट मीन्स ही हैज एक्चुअली एक्नॉलेज्ड और ही हैज रिस्पॉन्डेड टू योर ट्राइंग टू इनिशिएट दैट सेशन. यू स्टार्ट टॉकिंग टू ईच अदर एंड वी से दैट द सेशन इज इन प्रोसेस. जब तक आप दो यूजर्स या दो कम्युनिकेटर्स आपस में उस फोन के जरिए बात करते रहते हैं, वी आर सेइंग दैट देयर इज अ सेशन इन प्रोसेस. अगला इंपॉर्टेंट कॉन्सेप्ट जो कि हम स्टडी करेंगे दैट इज ऑफ अ नेटवर्क. वी विल एक्चुअली लुक इनटू द डिटेल्स ऑफ दिस कॉन्सेप्ट इन अ लिटिल बिट. नेक्स्ट कुछ स्लाइड्स में हम इसकी डिटेल्स भी देखेंगे, लेकिन अभी लेट्स गो थ्रू इट्स डेफिनेशन वंस. अ नेटवर्क is actually an interconnected group of computers and the communication devices, and we will surely talk about it in a little bit. Another important concept, a node. What do we mean by a node? We have used this word quite a couple of times in the last lecture or the first lecture. हम लोगों ने node के बारे में बात तो की, but we really didn't actually talked about the basic concept of a node. Node is any device that is a part of a network. A node is a network attached device. Ab node can be a computer, it can be a workstation, it can be a printer that is attached to a network. Therefore, node can be anything that is attached to a network or it is capable of sending or receiving data. The next important concept that we will talk about is a link. A link is a physical path or a physical thing that we can actually use to connect two adjacent nodes. Nodes, as I've already told you, are actually the communicating devices that are capable of sending and receiving. In order to send and receive, they have to have some kind of connection in between. These connections are known as links. Now, links can be wires, they can be cables, they can be a fiber optic cable, or we can have wireless links too. Another important concept, what is a path? A path in a network is an end-to-end route within a network. An end-to-end route means the total route that is specified from the source to the destination. Path वो वाला रास्ता है जो कि एक information या data लेगा when he is trying to go from the source to the destination. Next is an important concept of circuit. A circuit is actually a conduit or a physical path through which the data travels. Then comes packetizing. What do we mean by packets and what do we mean by the process of packetizing? Packetizing is actually dividing messages into fixed length packets. These packets are divided into equal numbers or according to the specification of the technology used. These packets are divided prior to the transmission over the network's communication media. The process of dividing the data into small chunks or small groups known as packets is known as packetizing. Then comes routing. Routing is a very important concept, as we will see in the next lectures. Routing is a process using which we can determine the messages path throughout the network. When we actually talk about a transmission medium, our transmission medium can itself be a big network. So in order to find the way through this network for the source to send some information to the destination is another big task. In order to do this, or in order to accomplish this task, the source need to specify a route through that transmission medium network so that the information can travel from the source end to the receiving end successfully. This process is known as routing. Before we can actually move on, I just need to mention a couple of more things. Last lecture में और इस lecture में, I think some of you might have been confused when I actually talk about two different concepts. Sometimes I talk about a sender and a receiver. Sometimes I talk about a source and a destination. So my dear students, please don't confuse yourself with these two different terminologies. ये दोनों basically एक ही चीज़ें हैं. जैसा कि मैंने आपको last lecture में एक छोटे से communication system के model से समझाया था कि when we actually talk about a simplest form of communication system, we are talking about a sender and a receiver. On the other hand, the other type of model, a little bit complex communication system model that we looked at into the last lecture, उसमें आपने notice किया होगा कि I use the terms source and the transmitter and then on the receiving end a receiver and the destination. तो इन दो terminologies का एक simple communication model में और एक a little complex communication model में क्या difference है? There is basically no difference, as I have already told you. फर्क सिर्फ ये है कि sometimes the information generated by the source is not in exactly the same format that can be transmitted over the transmission medium. Similarly, receiving end पे जो भी information receive होती है बहुत very often it's not exactly the type of information or the format of the information is not such that can be transferred directly to the destination. इस केस में हमें दोनों ends पे बजाय एक कंपोनेंट के या सेंडर या रिसीवर के हमें दो कंपोनेंट्स इंस्टॉल करना पड़ते हैं that actually perform the reformatting, or in other words they actually change the format of the signal such that can be transferred over the transmission medium on the sending end or that can be received by the destination on the receiving end. Let's move on to our next concept, a network. Data communication system पढ़ा हम लोगों ने. Now what is a network? What are the differences between these two concepts? What are the similarities between these two concepts? So let's define network first. When you talk about a network is a set of devices which we have already mentioned and defined as nodes. A network is a set of devices called nodes that are connected by communication links. My dear students, you have already defined the nodes and the links. आपको मालूम है कि nodes और links में क्या difference होता है. यही terminology हमने कुछ देर पहले study की है. When you talk about nodes can be a computer, it can be a printer, or it can be anything, as I have already explained, that can send or receive data. Similarly, links are those paths or are those connections that actually connect those nodes. अब इन links को हम किसी वक्त links के नाम से पुकारेंगे and at some other times we'll call these links to be the communication channels. In other words, our network is a combination of nodes in the form of computers, in the form of printers, and a lot of different devices that can actually send and receive data. And it's a combination of those devices plus the links that we have also mentioned as communication channels. हमारा network एक combination है इन nodes का और communication channels का. Now, why do we need networks? Wasn't a data communication system enough for the transfer of information? क्या in order to transfer the information from Lahore to Islamabad, isn't it possible कि आप एक direct link या dedicated link ले लें from Lahore all the way to Islamabad, and the two systems will be connected together, and then you need to communicate whatever you want. You can do that. But on the other hand, when you talk about a lot of different terminals, some specific cases do arise in which a point-to-point connection or a direct connection from one system to the other on a far-off place doesn't seem to work out. What should we do? What should be the solution? We'll talk about it in a little bit. First of all, let's try to look into a couple of reasons why our point-to-point connections are impractical on some instances. The first reason is the devices are very far apart. Let's talk about the devices at Lahore and the other station to be Islamabad. Let's take some more further examples. Let's say the two devices are present in Pakistan and USA. How can you even think about having a point-to-point or a dedicated or a direct connection between two devices in Pakistan and USA? It's totally not possible. It's totally not realizable. The second reason that we actually look at that makes the point-to-point connections really impractical is the number of devices that we need to connect. There is an impractically large number of devices that are there for the point-to-point connections to connect each one of them. मिसाल के तौर पर, let's look into the telephone systems. If you talk about the directly connecting two telephones that are present on two different places in this world, it's totally not possible. Similar is the case for computer terminals. अगर हम computer terminals को direct connections के ज़रिए आपस में connect करने की कोशिश करें, तो we are going to have a impractically large number of direct connections, which is not possible. So what's the solution? What do we do to actually bypass this situation and try to create something that can actually allow us to have connection between different devices and yet eliminate the need for a point-to-point connection? क्या किया जाए? The solution is a network. So what we are going to do is we are going to connect all the terminals, all the computers to a central system. एक central system के साथ हम उन सारे terminals को आपस में connect कर देंगे ताकि उस central system को use करते हुए all the devices can contact each other or all the devices can communicate with each other. हर device accessible हो दूसरी device को और वो आपस में बात कर सकें, but through a central system. अब एक और aspect है in networks का that I really want to mention, and we will explore it in real detail in the next lectures. That is, the computers are not only connected to a central system, but in order to connect to a central system, we have another added advantage that we actually utilize a lot. ना सिर्फ आप एक दूसरे से communicate कर सकते हैं very successfully, but you can also share the capacity and share the links. You can also share the resources. If some specific link is not utilizing all its resources or all the capacity that is available to it, we can make 2 or 3 devices to combine in the form of a network, and then all 3 or 4 of them can share the leftover capacity. Networks are basically of 3 types. There are 2 main types. We will actually discuss all 3 types in real detail in the later lectures. In fact, हमारे पास we are going to study full-fledged chapters on approximately each of these network types, but I just want to mention 2 types out here that we will be, the names actually we will be using quite often in the next lectures. तो मैं ये चाहता हूँ कि आप लोगों को कम से कम नाम से उनके बारे में थोड़ा सा, before we actually go to them and try to explain them in real detail, आपको थोड़ा सा मालूम हो कि इन networks की types क्या होती हैं, इनके नाम से what do we actually mean by those basically. LAN. There are 2 types of these networks. The first type is a local area network. Local area network is a network in which the devices are present in a small geographical area. Of course, we do have parameters or of how big or how small can that area can be, but the basic or the general definition is that a local area network is a network in which the devices are there that are present in a small geographical area. The second type is a wide area network or a WAN. The WAN is a network in which the devices are present in a relatively larger area. Before we can actually move on, let's talk about a little small thing that might have been confusing you for the last lecture. हमने पहले लेक्चर में दो कॉन्सेप्ट्स की बात की थी, दैट वाज लोकल एंड रिमोट कम्युनिकेशन. उस टाइम पर द डेफिनेशंस ऑफ लोकल एंड रिमोट वर अ लिटिल वेग. मैंने आपको बताया था कि थोड़ी सी कंफ्यूजिंग है, एंड इन द लेटर लेक्चर्स वी विल एक्चुअली क्लैरिफाई दोज डेफिनेशंस. तो व्हेन वी टॉक अबाउट द लोकल एरिया नेटवर्क्स एंड द वाइड एरिया नेटवर्क्स, देन we are actually clarifying those two local and remote communication definitions. When you talk about a local area network and a wide area network, when you move to the further lectures, तो आप ये देखेंगे कि हम actually कुछ particular numbers में या figures में उस area को specify करेंगे कि जिस पे we can have a LAN and beyond which our WAN starts, और a local area networks covered area will be specified. हमें एक डिस्टेंस का पता चल जाएगा कि इस डिस्टेंस पे अगर डिवाइसेस मौजूद हों एंड दे वांट टू एक्चुअली कम्युनिकेट विद ईच अदर, देन वी विल एक्चुअली हैव अ लोकल एरिया नेटवर्क आउट देयर. अदरवाइज वी आर गोइंग टू हैव अ वाइड एरिया नेटवर्क और सम अदर टाइप ऑफ नेटवर्क दैट वी आर एक्चुअली गोइंग टू लुक एट इन द लेटर लेक्चर्स. अब देखते हैं, हमने कुछ प्रॉब्लम्स पढ़ी, कुछ नीड्स पढ़ी. वी लुक्ड एट सम स्पेसिफिक नीड्स दैट एक्चुअली फोर्स अस टू हैव समथिंग लाइक अ नेटवर्क. हमने पढ़ा कि एक तो डिवाइसेस बहुत डिस्टेंस पे मौजूद हैं. सेकेंडली, दे आर रिलेटिवली impractically large in number. There is one other added attribute of networks that we need to mention out here that is very important in the data communication systems. वो aspect क्या है? That aspect is the distributed processing of the data. What do we mean by distributed processing? Distributed processing is actually a phenomena or a process in which instead of a single large system or a machine being responsible for all aspects of a process, each separate computer deals with the subset of that task. I'll explain it further. तो ये ऐसा ही है जैसे you have a big task at hand और आप उसको बजाय एक ह्यूमन बीइंग को या बजाय एक इंडिविजुअल को ये ऑर्डर देने के या ये रिक्वेस्ट करने के, यू हैव टू डील विद दिस टास्क, यू एक्चुअली डिवाइड दैट टास्क इनटू अ नंबर ऑफ इंडिविजुअल्स. हम एक मशीन पे सारा का सारा बर्डन डालने के बजाय व्हाट वी डू इज वी एक्चुअली डिवाइड द टास्क्स अमंग स्मॉल कंप्यूटर्स दैट आर अ पार्ट ऑफ द सेम नेटवर्क एंड देन वी ट्राई टू अकम्प्लिश द सेम टास्क. आइए इसी डिस्ट्रीब्यूटिंग प्रोसेसिंग के कॉन्सेप्ट को कुछ सिंपल एग्जाम्पल से समझने की कोशिश करते हैं. लेट्स talk about a small example in your daily life. You are basically students going through the bachelor's degree, so you must have gone through a couple of projects as a part of your courses. आप लोगों ने कुछ projects तो किए होंगे. Distributed processing is the same concept as you actually do in a project's course of time. जब आपको एक project teacher या कोई भी professor allocate करता है तो it's a big task. ठीक है, instead of only one student dealing with that specific task, what does the professor do? He allocates a subset of that task or different parts of that task to a number of students, maybe 2, 3, 4 or more than one students. इसके बहुत सारे advantages हैं that we will look into in a little bit. Another example can be of office work. I mean, in any office of any type, if you look at different employees, they don't know the exact task that they are working on, but what they are doing is उनका boss या उनका supervisor, they specify a major task with every employee working on a specific subset of task, and in the very end all those workloads or all those performances or reports combined together and they combine into a report of a major task that is submitted to the higher authorities. Now, why is distributed processing important in networks? Why do we actually talked about this specific attribute of the networks? कुछ तो advantages होंगे that we need to actually talk about. The first advantage that distributed processing offers is the security in a network. How is this accomplished? Is a system designer or a network operator can limit the access to a certain information for some specific employees. When you actually divide the task into a number of tasks and divide them into different employees, what you can do is you can actually limit a particular employee to just a specific amount of that task. इस तरह से आपके total task को और आपके total network को there is an added advantage of security. A simple example of the added security due to distributed processing is the bank's ATM machine. When the banks provide you with the ATM card to actually draw some money from the card, so what they are doing is they are actually allowing you to the access to their database or their system up to a small extent. आप उस system में जाकर अपने लिए कुछ कैश निकलवा सकते हैं, अपना अकाउंट का बैलेंस चेक कर सकते हैं, you can transfer some kind of money in there, but that's all. You cannot access that bank's system or that bank's network any more than that. So this is one of the things that you can actually accomplish by using the distributed processing. The second advantage is the distributed databases. When you actually talk about a big task or a big piece of information or a project that you need to work on, when you are talking about a process or a project, then उस tasks के लिए, उस specific task के लिए you need a very big storage area. Distributed processing हमें क्या allow करती है? It allows us to actually work on a specific task with different computers or different systems storing that the information for that same task. इससे we don't need to have a central big storage area. किसी एक specific machine पर burden नहीं पड़ता, but what you can do is you can have different small databases for the same information. For example, let's talk about the World Wide Web. www. आप रोजाना इंटरनेट पे you must have been browsing every day. तो what you are doing is आप एक central database को browse करते हो, that is World Wide Web. अब हर कुछ सब information या सब web pages उस World Wide Web पे store नहीं है. What it does it gives user access to different pages stored on different parts of the internet. This is another advantage of the distributed processing. Another advantage of distributed processing is fast problem solving. A very natural, a very, going through kind of a process in which problem solving becomes faster when you actually divide things around. This is a very humanative kind of a process जिसमें आप ये देख सकते हैं कि एक प्रॉब्लम को अगर एक से ज़्यादा लोग सॉल्व करने की कोशिश कर रहे हो तो it will always take much lesser time to get that problem solved. Another advantage is security through redundancy. Now, how you can explain this specific concept is when you're talking about a big task, then multiple computers work on the specifics of that task. अगर 3 computers एक ही database या एक ही task को accomplish करने के लिए काम कर रहे हैं, तो उस specific task में या उस specific program या hardware या software जो हमारे पास है, वो तीनों computers पर run कर रहा है. What if one of the computers crashes? What if one of the hardware gets corrupted? What if one of the software gets off? What are you going to do? तो distributed processing के case में you will have the option of getting the same piece of hardware or getting the same piece of software from the other through systems that are working on the same piece of task. The last advantage that I need to mention out here for the distributed processing is collaborative processing. Multiple computers and multiple users can interact with each other to collaborate on a specific task. When you talk about distributed processing, the collaborative processing actually means that everybody is working on the same task and everybody is collaborating with each other in order to accomplish that specific task. हर user या हर subset उस specific system या network का हर computer एक specific यूज़र है जो कि एक दूसरे से कोलैबोरेट कर रहे हैं, एक दूसरे की मदद कर रहे हैं एक बड़े टास्क को अकम्प्लिश करने के लिए. नाउ द नेक्स्ट इंपॉर्टेंट टॉपिक दैट आई नीड टू लुक इनटू इज द नेटवर्क क्राइटेरिया. व्हाट इज नेटवर्क क्राइटेरिया? नाउ व्हाट हैपेंस इज डेटा कम्युनिकेशन नेटवर्क एक्चुअली डिपेंड्स ऑन अ नंबर ऑफ फैक्टर्स. हमें ये मेक श्योर करने के लिए ये enforce करने के लिए कि a data communication system is working up to our expectations, it's working up to its qualifications, we have to understand that we have to make sure that a number of factors are carried on very well. There are 3 important criteria factors that we need to have into account when we actually need to judge a network. 3 points हैं, 3 specific critical points हैं that we need to have in view. First of all, we need to have a view of how a network is performing. Performance issues can be different types, and we will discuss each of them in real detail in a little bit. The second important criteria on which a network depends is the reliability. Reliability is a very important factor. Similar to the human beings, a network has to be reliable enough to be a good data communication network. The third factor on which the criteria of network depends, or on which the network depends, is the security in a network. In today's sensitive and busy world, security is a big issue. We have to make sure that the sensitive information we are communicating between devices on a network is secure. हमें ये ख्याल रखना पड़ेगा कि जो इन्फॉर्मेशन एक स्पेसिफिक सोर्स से एक स्पेसिफिक डेस्टिनेशन को, एक स्पेसिफिक सेंडर से एक स्पेसिफिक रिसीवर तक जाती है, वो इन्फॉर्मेशन is secure throughout the way. There should be no unauthorized access. Let's look into each of these 3 points in detail. The first criteria that I have already explained is the performance criteria. Now, performance can be judged by a number of different factors like transit time and response time and stuff like that. Transit time is the time that the message take to travel from the user to from the source to the destination. It is the time that is spanned in the transmission medium from traveling from the sender to the receiver. Similarly, response time is a time that actually the time that is elapsed in somebody sending a message to the receiver and then receiving the response from it. ये एक फैक्टर था जिस पे कि परफॉर्मेंस डिपेंड करती है. There are quite a number of other factors on which the performance of a network depends. Let's look into these factors one by one. पहला फैक्टर जो कि हम डिस्कस करेंगे, that is the number of users. The number of users actually affects the network a lot. When you talk about a load on a network, the more the load on a specific network, the more concurrent or simultaneous users are there that are actually using that network, the more will the performance of that network degrade. ये ऐसा ही है जैसे कि when you are trying to have a specific number of resources, if only a couple of people or 2 people share those resources, they are going to have a big share. Similarly, if you actually invite 2 more people to share the same amount of resources, each of the 4 individuals are now going to have a relatively less number of resources. 4 बंदे एक ही चीज को हर किसी का शेयर कम होगा as compared to 2 बंदे जो कि उसी resources को शेयर कर रहे हैं. Similar is the case with a network. When you actually try to increase the number of concurrent or simultaneous users in a network, the performance of a network degrades. When you actually design a network, you have to keep the performance factor in view. You have to design a network such that it can handle a specific number of users on it at a specific time. When the peak load periods are there, of course the number of users will increase. For example, in the office timings or in the academics environment, when you talk about the hours from 8 to 5, we are going to have a peak load on the network. सबसे ज़्यादा users इस 8 to 5 time period में उस network को use कर रहे होंगे. On the other hand, the load will be relatively less in the night time because nobody is going to be even present in the offices and in the schools and colleges. तो हमें design of the network को जब view करें तो उस वक्त ये ख्याल रखना चाहिए कि we are actually keeping the relative load in view. For example, if the loading characteristics of a network are not good, अगर under some heavy load a network falls down or breaks down, so it affects the performance of a network very badly. The second point that affects the performance of a network is the type of the transmission medium. मैंने आपको last lecture में भी कुछ explain किया था. We actually looked into a number of transmission medium. हमने twisted pair, coaxial cable, fiber optic cable और फिर microwave इन चारों 3-4 transmission mediums की relative speeds जो कि data जिन स्पीड से इन पर ट्रेवल कर सकता है और इनकी रिलेटिव कॉस्ट को स्टडी किया था. तो ट्रांसमिशन मीडियम का टाइप, द नेचर ऑफ द ट्रांसमिशन मीडियम आल्सो अफेक्ट्स द परफॉर्मेंस. फॉर एग्जांपल, a fiber optic cable as compared to twisted pair cable will give you high data rates. It will affect both the speed and the performance of the network. The data can travel at a relatively high speed as compared to the other forms of the twisted pair medium. Now, when you talk about the transmission medium, 100 megabits per second transmission medium will be 10 times faster than a medium that is running at 10 megabits per second. इसको थोड़ा और explain कर लेते हैं कि एक transmission medium, if it's running at a speed of 100 megabits per second, you can take 100 megabits, where mega is 10 raised to the power 6. If you can take 100 megabits on that specific transmission medium at in a second, and there is another transmission medium that is working at 10 megabits second only, then our initial system is 10 times much faster than the one that is actually working at a speed of 10 megabits per second. The third aspect that actually affects the performance of a network is the hardware that we are using in the network. The hardware affects not only the speed but also the capacity of the transmission, and we will explain capacity in a little while. The fast hardware or the fast computers with large storage devices will work much better as compared to small computers. For example, if you are working with the workstations and the nodes that are Pentium 4 PCs at a high speed, they will work much better than the Pentium 2 PCs at a low speed. Therefore, the type and the nature of the hardware also affects the performance of a network. The last of the performance criteria that we are going to discuss is the software in a network. एक नेटवर्क के अंदर सॉफ्टवेयर उतना ही इंपॉर्टेंट रोल प्ले करता है जितने के लास्ट 3 फैक्टर्स जो कि हमने डिस्कस किए. सॉफ्टवेयर processes data at each and every point. In fact, software is something that actually affects data at each point in a communication network. Software processes data at the sender, it processes data at the receiver, it works with data at the intermediate nodes. In fact, there is no specific point in the data in which we can process the data or work with it without the software. Now, this software is actually used in all the communication steps. When you're talking about moving messages from one node to the other, you need some specific software for it. Similarly, when you're talking about transforming messages from, say, bits to electromagnetic signals, you need a software at that specific point. When you are processing the data at the sender and the receiver, you need software for it. When you are talking about repairing or working around the errors that actually come when you are transmitting the data on the transmission medium, you need some specific software that can be used to correct or detect those errors. In short, अगर हम देखें तो सॉफ्टवेयर हर स्पेसिफिक पॉइंट पर हमारे डेटा की प्रोसेसिंग को इफेक्ट कर रहा है. तो वी नीड टू हैव अ वेल डिजाइन्ड सॉफ्टवेयर दैट कैन एक्चुअली स्पीड अप आवर प्रोसेस. 4 फैक्टर्स हमने देखे. द फर्स्ट वन was the number of users, the second one was the type of the transmission medium, the third one was the hardware, and the last one was the software. ये सब और चारों वो फैक्टर्स हैं जो कि हमारे नेटवर्क की परफॉर्मेंस को इफेक्ट करते हैं. लेट्स लुक इनटू द नेक्स्ट नेटवर्क क्राइटेरिया नाउ. हमने शुरू में 3 नेटवर्क क्राइटेरियाज की बात की थी कि 3 फैक्टर्स हैं जो कि एक नेटवर्क को इफेक्ट करते हैं. द फर्स्ट वन वाज परफॉर्मेंस, and we looked into the factors that actually affect performance, 4 of them. Now let's move on to the next network criteria, that is reliability. How reliable a network is? The question is not so simple. It also, like performance, depends on a number of factors. The first factor on which the reliability of a network depends is the frequency of failure. What do we mean by the frequency of failure? Every network fails sometimes, every network fails occasionally. किसी नेटवर्क में किसी भी वक्त कोई भी खराबी आ सकती है. But how often a network fails is the factor that actually judges the reliability of that specific network. If a network fails quite often, that specific network will be of no use to the user. दूसरा फैक्टर जो कि हमारी reliability of the network को डिसाइड करता है या जज करता है is the recovery time of the network after the failure. We have already talked about the network failure कि एक network occasionally fail भी हो सकता है, but what about the recovery from that network? How a network actually recovers from that failure, कितना time elapse करता है वो network उस failure से recover करने के लिए, is also an important factor that actually judges the reliability of that specific network. Then comes catastrophe. तीसरा important point is the catastrophe. Catastrophe is actually the natural disaster. It's कुदरती मुसीबतें, मैं इसका उर्दू में तर्जुमा करूँगा, जो कि जिन पे आपका कोई कंट्रोल नहीं होता, on which you have absolutely no control, like fire, like flood, like earthquakes and stuff like that. So basically, how protective or how reliable or secure your network is against those natural disaster or against those catastrophes is also another factor that actually tries to decides on the reliability of your network. Third network criteria, performance देख लिया, reliability we have already gone through. Let's go into the third network criteria, that is security. मैंने पहले भी आपको बताया कि in today's absolutely sensitive and busy world, security is a big issue. It's an issue that on which the research has been started from quite a few years now, और अब they are looking at ways on securing the important and the sensitive data. So it's another criterion that actually defines the network criterion or the performance of a network. The security actually depends on two important factors. Let's look into these factors one by one. The security on the very first hand depends upon the factor that is known as unauthorized access. When you talk about your data, a lot of times your data can be sensitive enough. Even if it's not sensitive, nobody would like somebody else to actually read the email that he wants to communicate with somebody else. अगर आप अपने किसी friend को या अपने किसी दोस्त को एक certain distance पे या किसी और शहर या मुल्क में एक email लिख रहे हैं या उससे कुछ file या कुछ information share करना चाहते हैं, you would not like that information to be shared with somebody else or any unauthorized access to that information. If somebody illegally accesses or tries to access that information in your network, that kind of process is known as the unauthorized access. Now, you can have multiple levels of protection against that unauthorized access. On the very lower level, like you are familiar with, you can use passwords and usernames. आप Hotmail देख लें, आप Yahoo देख लें, आप एक simple network पर अपना login देख लें. Your personal login or your personal information is protected at the very lower level from unauthorized access by using usernames and passwords. On a higher level, this total security is achieved by using some specific techniques that are known as encryption. हम लोगों ने last lecture में, when we looked at an actual digital communication system, if you do remember, we looked at a block, at an optional block that said encrypt. Encryption is a process that we actually use to specify or to convert our information in such a form that even if somebody receives it, he will not be able to interpret it. हम उस information को कुछ ऐसी form में ढाल देते हैं, कुछ ऐसी उसको form में convert कर देते हैं कि अगर कोई unauthorized access हो भी जाए तो that information is not exactly legible or interpretable to that unauthorized access user. The second part on which the security of a network depends is the viruses. You have to protect your network from viruses, different type of viruses that are very used to nowadays. You must have been receiving viruses almost every day in your Hotmail and your Yahoo mail addresses. So virus is another factor that affects the security of a network. Now virus is an illegally or illicitly produced code that actually some hacker or some unauthorized person tries to insert into your system. What that code does is that code can impose different kind of restrictions or different kind of problems in your system that can halt your system, that can make your system to automatically delete some important information, or that can even try to deny the service. What do we mean by denial of service? We will actually look into it in the next lectures. So, three network criterion that actually judge the performance of our network. The first one is the performance issues. We looked into 4 factors in it: number of users, type of transmission medium, the hardware and the software. The second network criterion is the reliability. We looked into the system failure, what is the frequency of that failure, how quick is the recovery from that failure, and then how do the network actually recovers from the catastrophe or the natural disasters. Third network criterion, the security issue, how a system recovers from different unauthorized access users like hackers, and how do it defend itself against the illegally produced codes like viruses. Next, we are going to move into another topic that is very important that you guys need to know. If you are working in the data communication or the networking field, you need to know what are the different specific fields in which we have networks applied to. What are the applications of these networks in our daily life? Of course, we will not be able to mention all the important applications. हम लोगों को ये तो नहीं मालूम. Almost everything around us uses networks and uses data communication technology, but we will just try to mention a little bit of some of the important factors or important applications in which networks are involved nowadays. The first important application of networks that I want to talk about is in the field of marketing and sales. Both of these professions involve a huge involvement of the networks and data communication systems in them. Let's talk about the marketing first. In marketing, you need networks, or the networks are basically used to collect, to exchange, and to analyze the data relating to the customer needs. Customer needs, or getting affiliated or acquainted with the customer needs, is a big part of the marketing profession. And most of the times, these three tasks, the exchange, the collection, and the analysis of data according to the customer needs in marketing, is carried on using the networks or the data communication systems. Then in the marketing field, the networks are also used in producing the development cycles. If you are a marketing person, or you have dealt with marketing at some point of your study, you must have known the importance of the development cycles, or developing the development cycles according to the user needs. Sales are getting information, providing networks and data communication system involved kind of networks day by day. When you talk about sales, we have tele shopping, we have internet shopping, we have online reservation systems. Nobody needs to go to door and try to sell some specific product or some specific idea. You can have a website on the internet, you can have a internet specific page that actually advertises your information, your product, and you can make people look into that product, try to acquaint themselves with that product, try to get the manuals and information about that product, and even sell that product online. The next important application for networks is in the financial services. When you look at banks, there is a huge amount of involvement of networks and communication systems out there. For example, online banking. The biggest system of financial services that are utilizing networks is the online banking. You can sit at your home computer and you can try depositing or drawing money from your bank using the internet. Similar is the case for the foreign exchange transfer. You can sit at your home at night at about 10 p.m., which was not possible in earlier days of the communication. You can sit at night at your home and try to transfer money to a far off place like USA in the nights, and you will be able to do that using what we know as the foreign exchange transfer in the financial services. Then you can have a different type of information that is available on the internet all the time. You can find out the foreign exchange rates, you can find out the stock exchange options, and we can name as many options as possible in the financial services that are actually available online to us. The next application that we are going to discuss is in the field of manufacturing. If some of you have been talking about or have been acquainted with the engineering field of profession, you must have been used to quite a few network applications that actually help you in the process of manufacturing. A couple of examples of networks helping us in the process of manufacturing is the computer-aided design systems, or the CAD systems, that are in very familiar and very large use nowadays. Then we have computer-assisted manufacturing processes, or CAM systems, that are also making our life easier by virtue of networks and data communication systems. The next application that we are going to discuss is a very normal application that I think you guys are going to be used to nowadays. It's electronic messaging, sending electronic emails or emails from one place to the other. The fastest method of the exchange of information in today's world seems to be emails, other than the telephone systems. Whatever you want to exchange with at a far off place, at a far off individual with some far off device, you can easily do that using emails in a split of a second. Another important application of networks in our daily life is in the use of teleconferencing. You must be familiar with the use of conferences that used to occur between places. Log dur dur se, using their different type of travel media, used to come to a specific place and try to meet each other in a conference. This is no longer the need now. You can stay at far off places and you can still talk to each other. You can still hold that kind of a conference using networks and using data communication systems. These conferences are of multiple types. You can actually chat with each other using your keyboard as the input device and your screen to view the messages. You can actually do the voice conferencing that involves the voice between two devices. आप video conferencing को use कर सकते हैं that can actually show you each other live on a TV screen. Then comes the cable television. Cable is a very famous, it's a very familiar and a necessary part of our home nowadays. It's by virtue of the networks and the cable network and the data communication systems that we are actually able to witness or see all the different channels that we can see nowadays using a cable TV. Now, this was today's lecture. Let's try to have a brief overview of what we went through in today's lecture. We started off with discussing the key terminology or the key technical aspects of a data communication system. कुछ definitions पढ़ी हम लोगों ने, कुछ ऐसे aspects discuss करने की कोशिश की जो कि अगले lectures में हमारे लिए helpful साबित होंगे. फिर हम लोगों ने देखा कि what are networks. हमने data communication system तो पढ़ चुके थे last lecture में. हम लोगों ने देखा कि एक data communication system से आगे निकलकर हमें network की ज़रूरत क्यों पेश आती है. Why are they essential? Why do we actually need them? We looked into a specific application of the data communication or the networks that we discussed in the form of distributed processing. हमने कुछ advantages भी study किए कि distributed processing चीज़ क्या होती है और हमें वो उसकी क्यों ज़रूरत है. Then what we did was we actually looked into the network criteria. एक network को judge करने के लिए कौन से different criterias हैं जो कि हमें available हैं. Performance, reliability and security were three of them that we actually discussed. ये किन factors पर depend करते हैं इसको भी हमने कुछ देखा. The last thing that we actually looked on was the network applications. हमारे आसपास in our daily life, how the networks and communication systems are affecting our daily life, how they are making our life easier. We looked into that. इससे पहले कि हम आज का lecture खत्म करें, dear students, let's go to the slide and look into the suggested reading for today's lecture. Section 1.3, Data Communication and Networking, second edition by Behrouz A. Feroza, and section 1.3, the same section from Data and Computer Communication, 6th edition by William Stellings. I hope कि आप इस suggested reading को ज़रूर go through करेंगे. That will help you a lot in understanding today's lecture. If you have any questions regarding this reading or this specific topics in the book, please feel free to email us on the email provided to you by Virtual University. I will see you again in the next lecture. Up till then, Allah Hafiz.